This is a very good question. Very good question. Lucas Hardy, he asks, in your video on the sacrifice of the Mass, you talked about how the Eucharist is immolated by a mystical separation of the body and blood. How does this work with communion in one kind? Okay, that's very good. So, what I want you to think about right now is think about this question. If you go to Mass and you're hearing Mass and you unite all of your intentions, you unite all of your prayers to the sacrifice being made at the hands of the priest, right? We all should be doing this, but at least we're all obliged to do this during Mass. That's the whole purpose of a lot of the Mass. If not, we would just kind of have a little devotional circle beforehand to get us a little bit ready, kind of like we do before the sacrament of penance. That's how the sacrament of the Eucharist would work. We'd kind of sit around and we would, be obliged to do certain devotions to prepare ourselves to receive the sacrament worthily, but we wouldn't have all of this other stuff. So think about it real quick. You're there. You've been praying and uniting your intentions to that sacrifice, et cetera, et cetera. So the up to the minute between the consecration of the Eucharist and the reception of the Eucharist in your mouth, between these 2 points, are you uniting yourself to the sacrifice? Has the sacrifice occurred? Now, the answer is yes, because the mystical immolation and the oblation to God happens not at the reception of the Eucharist, which that's when we receive the Eucharist sacramentally. Rather, the sacrifice happens at the dual consecration, because this, as I said, is mystical immolation. And immolation just means separation. So there's a separation, and we call it mystical because it's under certain symbols. So the symbols of bread and wine. And it's not merely symbolic, but also mystical insofar as this is a symbolic separation where there's a real presence as well. That's why we use the word mystical. Okay. So asking the question about reception in one kind of misses the point and confuses the sacramental order with the sacrificial order. I hope that makes sense. I hope that's helpful. Okay, when it is consecrated, there's a real separation between. Okay, when it is consecrated, there's a real separation between the body and blood. But by us uniting to the sacrifice, we receive His body and blood in the bread. Am I understanding correctly? No, no, no. You're not understanding correctly. Okay, let me see if I can explain it better. So there's never a real separation after the crucifixion. There's not a real separation of the body and blood of Christ. Christ, after his resurrection, is immutable in his flesh, or impassible in his flesh. So after this point, there is no real separation of the body and blood. There's only sacramental separation, or as we described it, mystical separation in the twofold consecration. Because what is a sacrifice except, as Hebrews tells us, the shedding of blood? That is the separation of flesh from blood. So this does not happen really, as you said it. So like insofar as Christ is being cut and blood is flowing out. Rather, this happens sacramentally or mystically. Okay, that's what happens in this case. But your reception of the Eucharist, your reception is something independent from that objective fact of sacrifice. So you don't somehow make the sacrifice true by receiving the blood, I mean the body or the blood. Yes, there's concomitance as you described it. So concomitance means we receive the entire Christ. But this is a completely separate question of the question of when, where, and how the sacrifice happens. You can have a priest who does the double consecration, he dies, and everyone in the congregation dies as well, and the sacrifice happened even while there was no sacramental communion. That makes sense.